We're going to learn the Maimer Loi Tia Meshakela and Torah. First of all, thank you to Rabbi Katzman who gave me this nice English printout. It's interesting because that there's a translation on this thing of Loi Tia Meshakela, filling our days with love of Hashem. That's what it says on here. But I was actually from a definition perspective, what is this mimer about? Maybe the mimer is about what our job is in this world. And Attack involves love, Ava and Yira, and but really the mimer is about what you're supposed to be doing. And I was actually very excited when I got this particular mimer of Pashas Mishpatim because the Rebbe said a mimer in Tafshin Yud Beis. It's a very famous mimer in Tafshin Yud Beis, and it was said on Shabbos Pashas Mishpatim, which is Erev Mavarchim HaChodesh, and it was the Rebbe got extremely emotional during that mimer, and he cried a lot. And the Rebbe cried to a point where he even put down his head, and he stayed down for a while, and he kept wiping his tears. And
What year was this?
In Tafshin Yud Beis. And Reb Mendel Futterfa says that this is the first mimer from the Rebbe that actually made it across the Iron Curtain. Now, so I heard about this mimer from the Rebbe already for years ago, and a lot of people around here say that this is their mimer in life. This is the mimer that gives them their marching orders, and every year, and they keep relearning this particular mimer. Now the interesting thing is, I learned through the Rebbe's mimer as well. So when I was looking through to prepare, and it's interesting because the Rebbe focuses on different elements of Avodah. The Rebbe adds in the elements of the big thing that is part of this mimer that makes this mimer unique is like, what are you supposed to do? What is your job? And it's the Hasidic explanation of the words Loi Tia Meshakela, and like, what's your job? What are you supposed to do, and what's the Eibishter supposed to do? And Alter Rebbe goes to various different levels. Like, if you're on this level, this is your avodah, and then if you're not on that level, then you have to do this. And the Rebbe goes into, in many ways, like the most practical part of it, and he almost skips out. I'll try to mention a little bit more later, but the Rebbe focuses really, what are you supposed to do today? What is your avodah supposed to be today? So we're going to start with the mimer and Torah. I'm going to go somewhat quick because the mimer gets more relevant as we go on. Not relevant, but more directly related to something that we can do in our avodah as we go on. There's the way it's supposed to be, and then the way it actually is. So let's get started. There's Loi Tia Meshakela Ba'akar Ba'atzecha. So this is a pasuk. This is the first pasuk of Shvi of this week's parsha, and Meshakela is explaining in Rashi that this is a woman that miscarries or she has a stillborn. It says the Eibishter's blessing that there should not be any miscarriages, and I will fill up your days. In ki yesh l'mayla b'chinas eretz hachayim shemimeno nishpach chayim u'mazon l'klalus nishmas Yisrael la'avas avayu lasis kol mitzvaysav asher yas oisam ha'adam v'chay b'hem chayim amitim. So it's basically is the avodah that we have to do to get life. Says dogmas eretz halazu hatachtoinu hagashmis shematzmachas kol mine megadim lahachir es b'hem nefesh kol chay chayim gashmim. So the same, what he's saying over here is that the same way that the land down here, when we plant, it grows. The same thing is we have a job to plant lamaila in the land lamaila, and that's how we get the hashpah from the Eibishter. Mezulase en kiyum v'chayis l'chal adorim aleo, ki lo yoyel hoin v'osher zav v'chesed im lo yeh temach adam chas v'shalom. He says, down here on this world, you can be as rich, you can have as much gold and silver as you can possibly have, but at the end of the day, if the land does not give forth fruit or a vegetation, you can't live. So he says, "B'chol chayis ruchni," the same thing. Hanimshach la'adam l'teira v'la'avoda kol hu al yedei eretz hachaim hu al yoino. He says everything that we receive in ruchnius, we get from the land of life from above. Kameshikosav ba'artzois hachaim. It says the land ba'artzois, which is talking about the. It says over here in parentheses, "Mashikosav ba'artzois hainu ki yesh eretz ilah ve'eretz tata." The hainu knesses Yisrael de la'ela. Knesses Yisrael de l'sato. Gam l'maylo yesh b'chinas knesses Yisrael. Yisrael olu b'machshav. I don't want to elaborate on this. We'll get to explanation in a little bit, but basically, there's different types of land. Both l'maylo, there's land. There's the physical land, and there's malchus datzilis, which is l'maylo. And he says, "V'nikra b'shem eretz, ki k'may eretz halazu agashmis ein koyach tzmichasa mitzad atzma, elo min azriya, v'koyach hatzameach asher nitam ba, liyos mimeno v'al yoda nigdol v'nitzmach kol hazroim shebeseicha." He says the land itself does nothing. If you just have land, it's not going to make anything grow. But the koyach that is put into the land, that the Eibush to put into the land, is what actually makes things sprout and grow. It says, "Kach hachaim haruchnir, hamim shochim v'nishpoim me'eretz hachaim, hem nimshochem imekher v'chaye hachaim baruchu, ki hu hanoisen koyach ba'aretz lahayti tzimcha." He says that's what gives the koyach to actually make things grow. So he says, what's your job then? If the Eibush is the one that makes it grow, then what's your job? So he says, and we know that even though people sow and plant down here, and there's times when there's other effects and the land doesn't actually grow anything. So you can only do your job. You can plant as well as you can possibly plant, but at the end of the day, it's the Eibush that is going to have to make it grow. That's v'hainu k'moshe kosav zarua l'tzadik ki v'amech kulam tzadikim tziv ve'eino shem ha'teir the hainu madregas tzadik amitish nisbar b'makam acher ela reitze leimer madregas adam kasha she'ena rasha chas v'shalom k'moshe ama tzadik v'rasha loy kama. He says he's not talking about the tzadik that we're talking about in Tanya, but he's saying that as long as you do your job, essentially, and the Eibishter is going to do his job. Okay. Says Havas Havaya, Uchakasa Elov Yisbarach, Hanimshach La'adam, Hine Huzarua, Be'eretz HaChaim LaTzadik, Hirish Lias Tzadik, Umekusha Bavaya Ledavkabai. Says your job is to connect yourself to the Eibishter. That's it. That's all you got to do.
Plug in.
Yeah, and this is what I was trying to say about the Alter Rebbe. So he talks in a language that was a very relevant language to his. First of all, this is one of the Alter Rebbe's earlier Maimarim. So, but he was talking to his inner circle of Chassidim. So, the initial avodah that can be expected is just connect yourself to the Eibishter. It says, "V'zois yosim ha'adam al liboy v'yeda ne'emana v'yamin b'emuna shleimo ki kol ha'hava v'yira hanimshachim elav hu matnas alikim shenoisim te'ach hatzemeach ba'aretz elyona la'atzmiach avas Havaya v'yirasei alpana v'enam nimshachim mikayach ha'adam ha'ovid ha'atzma." Because you just have to know. You have to just know that everything at the end of the day is a gift from the Eibishter. Says Valkain kol ikar avoidasei. He says, and this is where the nekuda is. This is what your job is. He says, Lo sia lev avaya ma'atzmoi. He says, don't try to love God. Don't try to love God. Sheyehu ha'ovid v'hu ha'oyev. That you considering yourself the one that is doing the avodah, and you are the one that's loving the Eibishter. He says, your job is va'avadatam havaya elekechem. Pirushay lefi pshutai ain't a moving. The Eibishter needs us to do any work. The Eibishter is so much higher than anything that we can possibly ever do that the Eibishter doesn't need anything from us. What do you, even if you're doing the right thing, what are you doing for the Eibishter? Elo ha'inyan ki havaya pirush haya hoiva v'yer v'ani havaya lo shanisi v'kula kamek l'chashiv. The Eibishter is above it all. And he says, what's your job? V'si avodaschem kol kach ad shebechinas zu tia eslachem bebechinas elokeichem ki ilu hu elokim shalachem. Your only job is to make this idea that the Eibishter is bigger and greater than anything that you can ever imagine. You have to make that your Elokim. What is Elokim? Elokim is the thing that you can relate to. Elokim is the way the Eibishter makes everything work in the world. And he says, your job is to make Havaya, which is way higher, to you, Elokim. That should become your Elokim. He says, how do you do that? He says, I'm sorry. What is it he said? That's not our job. Our job he says our job is not. Yeah. So we'll elaborate down on that in a second. But he's saying your job is not to love the Eibishter. Your job is to be an Oved Hashem. Okay. And he's saying, what does it mean to be an Oved Hashem? You have to understand that the Eibishter is Havaya, and he's bigger than anything that has anything to do with anything, anything to do with the world. That has to be your daily life approach. And he says, the Hainu sheyesh sheireg v'kavua b'mayach u'machshava u'murgash v'nitfas b'sichloi be'emes la'amitoi ki'ilu einof royos gilui elikusei yisbarach mamash. Every part of you, your brain, every part of you has to be completely taken over by this concept of Havaya. He says, so now he's saying, what does it say in davening? Baruch atah Hashem, right? Elokeinu v'elokei Avosenu, Elokei Avraham. Says what it says, Elokei Avraham, Hagadol. What does that mean? Baruch atah Hashem, Elokei Avraham. Once I say Baruch atah Hashem, why do I have to say Elokei Avraham? That's because the Eibishter is giving you a gift. He's making something more relatable to you. He says, really, Hashem is higher than anything. But the same way that you find the greatness of the Eibishter is also you find also his anvanus. You're going to find also his another. So it says the Eibishter is giving you a way to experience, to relate to Havaya as a gift to you. He says, Ki be'emes kula kamei kelo choshev v'slapshusa v'bechinas gedula kavyachal anovahi hu be'emes ikra avodah mekan ikra hascholim in l'mayla l'mata. So he says, that's really your job. I know I'm jumping through this, but we'll get to it in a second. It says, v'zehu be'emes avodah gedela sheyuchal moichoi hagashmi lekabel v'litfos v'gilui elikusa yisbarach. He says, what happens afterwards? If you do this avodah that the Eibishter takes you over completely. He says, "V'hine bekan noilda v'nis'erir amidos ahava v'yira v'nikra b'shem hoylada." Because that's when it's going to give birth to ahava. That's when you love, and that's, by the way, the answer, Rabbi Fuss. He says the answer is like your job is not to try to love. He says your job is to try to be an Oved Hashem and to connect to the Hashem on the level of Havaya. And he says once you do that, then you'll get the ahava from the Eibishter. That's right. That's basically the gift you get in return. He says, he says, where do we see that? Dochar chasda can also be read as dochar, and chesed we know is ahava, right? So dochar chasda shows that it's a ben, and it says Bas tchila siman yofa lebanim. So what comes before ahava? Yira. So we know that we're talking about ahava and yira are born as a result of your avodah. So the Eibishter is giving it to you as a gift. Shetzarich la'eder yiras havayu pachta tchila. Kizeh hashar la'Hashem shenizbar b'mokem achon. Okay, so this is the first. This is in a perfect world how your avodah is supposed to be. In a perfect world, you are ready, and there's nothing stopping you, and you just have the ability to give yourself over and say, Eibishter, you're it. And it's to a point where you can make that it never can get interfered with. Is that actually possible? No, it's not possible. It's not possible. For many people, it's not even relatable. We're not going to get to the end of this mimer. So, like in the end of the mimer, he says that this became impossible by the Chet Tzadas. He says because the minute the Chet Tzadas happened, what happened before Chet Tzadas? Leading up to it, the Nachash was convincing Chava that she should try from the Eitz Hadas, and until that moment, Adam and Chava they were not dressed, and it didn't interfere. And the minute she ate from the Eitz Hadas, she realized that she's not dressed. What does it mean that she realized she's not dressed? Because why do we even get dressed? Why do human beings get dressed? Why is there such a thing as fashion? Like, where does this concept come from? It's all, in theory, it's a cover-up. Just like I want to look good. I want today I want to be this. Tomorrow I want to be that. The idea that you need to cover yourself up is a cover-up. It says inherently, before the Chet Tzadas, there was this concept that it was never about them. They were completely given over to the Eibishter, and therefore clothing just didn't figure into the equation. It says as soon as the Chet Tzadas happened, that was no longer a possibility. So really, from the moment of Chet Tzadas, there was always going to be a zuama. There was always going to be something that is in the way of having that pure, unadulterated connection and love of the Eibishter. I'm just bringing this in as over here as in the Kudah. He says, but really, this is the perfect avodah. The perfect avodah is that it doesn't require anything else. You can just connect yourself to a level of the Eibishter. That's it. I'm good. Just. It says, "Masha ein kain, kisha ein avodas al derech zeh." This is, yeah. So now he goes to the next thing. And here is a very interesting thing, and some of us learned the Smimer lately, and this is a very relatable thing. Actually, tonight is Chodesh Adar, and it says Mishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. It says Marbim B'Simcha, yeah, L'chaim is definitely one way, but Marbim B'Simcha Be'emes is to be Megala Simcha Amiti, and he says in this next piece of the Mimer, he hints to this idea that we were discussing. Says Masha Enken Kishain Avodas Al Derech Zeh Bechina Zu Rak Sheroitz Leachas B'Midas Ahava V'Yira Liyos Oyev V'Yarei. This is again this concept that he wants to love God. He wants to fear God. It's like, I love God. He says, what's wrong with that? He says, because it's as soon as you enter the word I into the equation, it's no longer the same. He says, it's not going to succeed. He says you will never experience true love that way. The only love that you will ever experience is a pretend you're gonna a superficial version of it. I'm sorry. Yeah. It says you may experience extreme love for a moment or for an hour or for a day or a week, but he says it will never last. So he says, what is this? And now we're going back to the pasuk that we started from Chumash. He says, "V'nikra b'china zu mishakela." He says, this is called mishakela. What do you mean? What's a mishakela? A shakela, we said, is either a miscarriage or a stillborn. It says, she became pregnant. The woman became pregnant. That means the love started, but it died. That's because this love cannot last. Because as soon as the love has any sort of connection to you, and not an unadulterated love, meaning it's not about completely about the Eibishter, it can never last. So he says, as soon as you enter the word I love Hashem, you're already not there.
You're a hindrance.
Yeah. So he says, now the next level, but in the pasuk it says Meshakela is a miscarriage, and then it says Ve'akara. What's an akara? A barren woman. It says Hainu she'ena yeleda sahava v'yira klal. He says that one, she never became pregnant. He says that is already called tumtum alev. She cannot become. The Rebbe calls it tumtum alev in his mimer in Tafshin Yibes. He says like because the heart, your heart is stuffed. What does it mean that your heart is stuffed? And this is the mimer that we were learning of the Yasfu Anovim, which is a mimer that discusses that when you have anything that is about you, anything that fills up the space that is about you, you can no longer experience anything true on the outside because it will always be affected by what is going on inside of you. It says, "V'zeu lo yitzim meshakeh levakar ba'artzecha, ki sibas hayois bechinas elu meshakeh levakar hu machmas kehem ba'artzecha ve'enom boy me'eretz elyoina." And the Rebbe actually talks about artzecha meaning eretz from Lashon roitze, rotzen. He says that if you even want something for the wrong, like if you want to do it, it's already you. And he says, then, then you already, the Rebbe actually uses a very strong lesson. He says that moment when you entered yourself into the equation. And it reminds me also of the Friedrich Rebbe's version of the Yasfamayim. The Friedrich Rebbe keeps talking about the idea that we're not talking about an obviously bad person. We're talking about an amazingly good person. It says, but it's like, I'm giving tzedakah. I love you. I am. There's a word I. There's something else in there, and the Rebbe mentions in his mimer that as soon as that word enters the fray in any level, he says then you the greatest thing that you're doing today is going to lead to the worst. And then the lashon that the Rebbe uses, he says I'm doing this mitzvah because I love this mitzvah. And it says like that, and then what does it lead to? That you say, oh, this is something that I'm good at. Then you start choosing between the ones you like and the ones you don't like until you're completely gone.
So we're doomed.
So he says, the minute it's about
But it has to be about you because it's impossible to separate yourself from what you're doing.
Yeah.
So there's no way, and you're going to get a satisfaction whether you realize it or not, because that's how we're wired. So, yeah, but even with bittul, when you're being self-annulled, you're still selfing. You're still annulling yourself. You're still there. You understand?
Yeah. No, it's true. It's a very legitimate concern, and we're talking about. Yeah. No, and really, this is
what I'm saying. There has to be an upside now. That even though that's part of the case,
yeah.
But I mean,
otherwise it's gonna get depressed.
No. I mean, there has to be some light because otherwise you're finished.
So the Rebbe actually mentions in the Maimon very interesting, and I've always you want to know. So what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And there's something that the Rebbe mentions, which is it's not mentioned in here, but he says like this. He says, do it because it's Mispar Yomecha Amale. He says, you know, a Mispar Yomecha that you were given a certain amount of days that you can agree upon, right? He says, now you know that you have a certain amount of days. He says, just get the days filled. He's saying it's not about you. It's like it's about the day. And what that means, what does it mean? It's like Chas v'Shalom, you see someone sitting in a burning car. Are you going to say, okay, I am going to walk over to this car. I'm going to open the door, and I am going to pull out this person from a burning car? Or are you just going to say, this person needs to be pulled out of the burning car? And really, at that particular moment, probably you're not going to have time to think about I. So he says,
it's the day that needs salvation.
So he says, yeah. So he says, don't make it if you want to know what to do, think about the day. Don't think about yourself. Think about the fact that the day needs to be felt. And by the way, the Rebbe cried very heavily when he was saying those particular words because the Rebbe, it was every second was so precious. It was like every second counts. And it's like we need to account for every second in life. Yeah, but this one actually is famous for. Okay, so far we mentioned shakela, which is basically someone that gets to experience temporary love, but it dies off. Then you have an akara, who says you have a metamtem alev, so you can't experience it on an emotional level, but at least you can think about it.
Prayer is the what's called the solution is the Zimra. It's progression. As you go through the Zimra, and then it says, and if you get to Abba Salem and you're still not there, then bang your head against the wall and cry out, baby. That's the lesson that Rebbe uses.
Yeah.
Because at that point, if you think to my left, you know,
Yeah.
ask the Abishah to throw you a lifeline, because that's what you got to do.
Actually mentioned in here as well.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. We're not there yet. There's still hope before. But yeah, definitely that's part of the avodah. So he says now we spoke about these two levels. First of all, that you can experience a temporary moment of love, but then it goes away. Then there's the person that cannot experience it, meaning that their emotion is stunted. They can't actually feel it, but at least they can still think about the greatness of the Eibishter. And then he says, the next level, and this is in chapter 2, he says, Achina yesh oit bechinas hakara. He says, if you look at the pasuk, what does it say by Sarah? It says, but yeah, it says that I'm sorry, but who can you remember? I'm saying the different I'll pasuk ein love vlad, afilu beis vlad ein love. It says what really, if it said that she was an akara, I already knew that she cannot have kids. So it says, what does it mean ein love vlad? So it says that means that she was never able to even have the possibility of having children. It says she didn't even have the beis vlad. He says that's the next level down. He says v'shahayu tumtumim. He says Avram and Sarah, according to this explanation, were tumtum, and he says pirish shenistam kol kach at she'ein kol kli kibul lekabel eroin. It's like it cannot become pregnant at all. Val derech zeh hine yesh ba'adam gam ken bechina zu la'avedas Hashem she'ein teifus b'moichay v'sichloi ha'emes kashehu. He says not just can you not feel it, but you cannot even think about it because your mind is completely full of other things, and therefore it's not entering you at all. There's machmash ein like klimasik. Is it what? Okay, so in the Rebbe's Maimer, he filled it in that basically that you're so full, you're so full of your own. Your brain is filled with so much other stuff that you don't have any room for to truly experience it. So it says, says in general, we know that we're called the Kais Yeshuas. We're called like a cup of salvation that to receive the kindness from the Eibishter. Shehu klei kibul lekabel chasadim alyanim. Says v'nikreis Kais shal bracha, and we're also called the Kais shal bracha. Says shemekabeles yain hamisameach dahainu bechinas isbeinenus hanal dahainu keshehu kli reikam. It says what we spoke about before is the way it's supposed to be, the hisbeinenus that we're supposed to be supposed to do, so that we can experience this level of the Eibishter. That's how it's supposed to be. But that requires a kli reikam. It requires an empty vessel. Why? Because you need to have space. You need to have room for it. Says Masha Enken in Machzik Mokim La'atzmai V'nechshav Ba'atzmai Le'yesh V'davu B'fnei Atzmai. When he's full of himself, and there's no space. L'chen hu ezik b'retzainav loima koch ani reitze v'koch toiv li ze eini yochel lasos v'kayotze b'dvarim. He starts making a cheshbon about himself regarding everything. Says v'yesh b'zeh pratim or pratim adei mispar. Says this can go unlimited. and unlimited to a degree that we can even be talking about ruchnias, we can be talking about everything. As long as it's full of something outside of complete bittul, you're filling yourself up with.
It's not good.
Yeah, so he says, Ach derech klau yesh bechina zu lechol echad ve'echad limtza b'nafshay. Hein ha'iskim b'maisamatin, hein yeshvim oihalim b'chol davar she'emer ani. As soon as the word ani enters into the conversation, whether it's ruchnius or gashmius, he says, machmazen nistamtem nistam moicha. His head, his mind becomes sealed. He no longer is a true keli felikus. Yeah, so there's definitely a level of that. So he talks about it. Actually, one of what he mentioned before, like when you reach that lowest level, and you have to, it's going to mention it in a second.
When you're crying out, that's actually bittul.
Yeah. So because if the intellectual avodah is no longer available to you, then you have to resort to the next level. And he says, "Vehine ha'etza lasis klirekin." He says, first you have to try to make yourself into an empty vessel. Hukameshakosov leiv nishba v'nitka. Eshkon is that you have to literally think about the fact that you can't experience this. I don't know if I should be saying this on video, but I once went to a hypnotist. I wanted to try hypnosis, and I went to a hypnotist, and one of the things that they rely on in hypnosis is that they fill your head with with noises and sound and all kinds of things to occupy every part of your mind, and then they can get through to the inner part of your mind. So I was sitting there, and he's putting the lights and he's putting the different things, and I'm thinking, okay, now he's putting the lights, so I should be thinking about this. And, it was not working. And then basically I came to a point that I said, you know what? I guess hypnosis doesn't work on me. And the minute I said that to myself, I got hypnotized. So,
Because you let go. You can't fight it.
Just said it's not going to work on me, and that's when you got to hypnotize.
that's right. So because the minute I gave up on trying to fight it with my mind, so again,
You have to let yourself.
this is not. So it's just the idea that. So yes, sometimes you have to just realize that even the fact that you cannot that you cannot even think about the Eibishter, that can bring to a leiv nishbar. It can shatter you. The fact that you have no ability to even intellectually understand what it means to have the Eibishter. Says has to hammer it down in saviv saviv achnas achol b'seichel. How is a vessel made? That you take a block and you keep hammering it until you create a hole on the inside. He says that sometimes you gotta just break it until you make a hole. The koch adam yitka v'yashayach liyashfal ruach shelo yitka is makom klal she mekaymo pano v'cholo ki'ilu ayin ve'efes mamish. Just you gotta hammer away until you make room. He says, he says, now I'm going to take you to the next part. He says, that's not enough. He says, you can't just hammer in a why. What happens? He says, what happens when you try to fill up, let's say you take a piece of metal, and you hammer a hole into it, and then you fill it up with wine. What's the wine going to taste like? Like, there's no way. The hammer is dirty. The metal is dirty. It's like you're ruining everything. Everything that you're going to pour into that vessel at that moment is going to get ruined right away. It says, you got to remove everything. So it says, really, you have to try to remove your enjoyment from everything. Even though you gotta just, yeah, I gotta eat. Okay, I'll eat. I have to drink. I'll sleep. Yeah, I have to sleep. But take everything away. Take all the feeling away. says ve'em hita liba v'nikshar liyas behavlei ha'olam efshar liyas kli kribul at sheyitar. As long as you have any sort of vanities, as long as you're connected to the physical world, says you can never truly become a kli kribul. And by the way, in regards to what you were saying, that it's a very discouraging thing, we're all Bainanim. We all have to look at ourselves on the darg of a Bainani, and therefore, a Bainani, the idea of a Bainani is that they're always struggling their entire lives. And ultimately, how is a Bainani judged? A Bainani is judged that they do the right thing anyway. So there can be a concept that you're not there yet on every level. You know, the Alter Rebbe is talking about an avodah that sometimes feels like the perfect version of it is still removed. Even this version of Leiv Nishba V'nit, this idea is not always very relatable. And that's why sometimes when you look at the Rebbe's Maimer and he says, just do it, or just go out there and just do it anyway. Yeah. Or essentially hack the system. If your brain is not on board, just do it anyway. Like go out there and put on film. So there's always another layer that you can relate to. But right now we're talking about how do you get to an intellectual and emotional place where you can get to Sahaba and Yira. And he says, he says you can't put in any wine until you wash it out. The same way that a woman cannot get pregnant until she's matar herself. Okay, that's chapter 2. And then comes the next level. It's like, what happens now? It's like, let's say you did this, but you're still not there yet. It says that's the thing that you were mentioning before. It says that comes from the Bechina of Chana. So it's like this. It says, you did already everything that you could do on your own. What does it say about Chana? She said that she davened, she beseeched the Eibishter al Havaya. You ever thought about that? It doesn't say El Hashem. It doesn't say that she davened to Hashem. She davened on Hashem. It says when you run out of options through the regular way, if working your way up, he says that sometimes you just gotta go, you gotta come in from the top. It says says, okay, so there's two levels. There's Chana, which is basically the one you can't connect, you can't have kids. And then there's the level of Leah, Aim Habanim, which is that you do have kids. If you are in a state that you cannot give birth to Ava V'yira, that you cannot be Mamshech Ava V'yira from the Eibishter, yeah. You're called Chana. That's called the Bechina of Chana. And it says, Chana al Havaya. Says your job is to go from the top. Yeah. One of the things that talks about in Chassidus, not here, but the idea of Yehi Ratzon is to be Mamshech and New Ratzon, to go basically to a level that is higher than the way it's supposed to be. So generally, Havaya is also Meloshin. I'm blanking out, but there's Havaya that we think about. There's the Eibishter, the way he's connected, at least in some level, with creation. We can say the Atzilus and whatever level you want to say, but there's still some sort of a connection. He says, really, you need to go above that. There's a part of the Eibishter where it's way above that. Let me read through it quickly and then we'll discuss it for a minute. It says, She'ein chiluk b'neim ela shezeh bara v'zeh yotzer. Says to the Eibishter makes no difference. Yotzer, bara, just a different version. Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. It says aval derech klal. Hinehu mechaya is kulam mahava isim ma'ayin liyash. Really, the Eibishter on every level is mahava ma'ayin liyash. Achamit Hashem zeh ena elu legabe olam es hanetzolim. V'anivroim hanetzolim v'anasim. It says this is only legabe us. Aval legabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvode v'asma lo shayach klal lo ymer shem zeh the kula kamei kala chashiv the enam nitfasim etzloi begedem mitzias klal k'mo shekasav ani avaya lo shanisi v'ata hu kodem shenivra v'ata le'achar shenivra. Like the real Eibishter has no connection to any of this. The real Eibishter is higher than any sort of creation at all. So it says, "V'zeh ma shekasav b'pirkei de Rabbi Elazar at sheloi nivra olam haya HaKadosh Baruch Hu shmoi v'vad." Here is shmoi levad. Shmoi ene begeda have mahava or mechaya klal ela hu levad. The Eibishter was in a state of levad, or is in a state of levad on that level. Inyan niskaf shmoi levade v'niskaf hu meira ala flogi yiseiru shehu muflag harbe ma'olam es hanetzalim cholim. Rak ki hoydoi al eretz v'shamayim pirish nimshach hoyd v'ziv mishmoi lechayis eretz v'shamayim, that the Eibishter radiates to give to create the world. Ach vayorim karen la'amor. It says ksiv liyos loy am kroiver. So ksiv liyos loy am kroiver liyos kroiver me'elov ba'atzmoi kedei lekavam elov lekol b'yichud is barach k'moshe emrim chem l'gdei v'seider chulu promotion is baba malkamach. So it says the Eibishter decided to give us a gift. Really, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing that matters. There's nothing that you will ever do in this world that should have an influence on the Eibishter. You know, there's an interesting little thing. In physics, there's something called quantum physics. Quantum physics is a very interesting field, which when it came to being physics, it was going to uproot the whole idea of physics, because they couldn't fit it in with regular physics, because they couldn't, it didn't match up with a lot of the preconceived notions of physics. One of the big things on a really superficial level is the thing that as soon as you observe something, as soon as you look at something, you're changing it. Because of that, you can never really see something the way it is. That is something that was accepted, and basically what they had to do is they had to say, instead of actually observing something the way it is, that they'd come to this point of saying that this is how it would be if I were not observing. And it's a very important thing today. It's not just a crazy idea, because now they're making quantum computers, and in quantum computing, they can't actually. The way quantum computing works is that you can never truly see the calculation. You have to estimate the calculation, and it's a very complicated thing. But the thing that I wanted to mention is this idea that when you look at something, you're changing it. It's called entanglement. That it's the minute you become entangled with this wave, you're changing the wave. So, what does that mean, B'Pearl Mamish, that you're changing the wave? It says that you're changing the reality. They used to always say that that's why there's no such thing as a deterministic universe, because anything is always affected by everything else. But now, there's this new concept that they're discussing. It's like, this becomes a fork in the road. When you look at it, it changes for you. You become entangled with it, but the original version still remains. So there's parallel universes going on, and without going into too much detail, there's the idea that as soon as you observe something, or as soon as you interact with something, it changes for you. This becomes the new reality for you. I thought it was very interesting, just mitzat the idea that as soon as the idea of you comes in, it's over. And it's very fascinating, because these ideas used to be completely unrelatable. How do you relate to a concept like this? But now it's proven. They can scientifically prove that the minute you get involved, it's different for you. You can never observe something the way it is. It concept doesn't exist. You can never observe something the way it is.
Definitely can be.
But the big chiddush is that now they're saying that the emes la'amitzah doesn't change. Because this new concept in physics that the emes la'amitzah doesn't change. It changes for you, but that was never an accepted idea. So it says that there is a state the way it is, and that state you're not affecting, but you created a new state, which is the interaction with you. And it's like this is how this. As soon as there's an ani, it's no longer you can no longer experience something the way it is. I don't know how well those two things relate, but it's just an interesting idea. So he says the Abishter ultimately, and we're going to finish in a second, but just to finish this idea, he says, how do you do this? He says you contrast. On one hand, the Abishter does not need you. The Abishter, nothing that you're going to do in this world is going to change anything in the Abishter. The Abishter is so much higher than any world, any universe. Why? But for some reason or another, the Abishter decided, by Yorim Keren La'amai, and he said, Liois Loi Am Kroivai. He decided that the Abishter wanted to give us the possibility as Yidden to be able to affect things on that level. He says, if you think about that, how you could have been created as anything from an atom to an animal or an ant or any part of the universe or any cosmic ray or anything, and the Abishter decided to make you not just a human being, but he made you a Yid. And the Abishter gave you this possibility to affect everything up to the Abishter alone. And when you contrast this idea that number one, the Abishter does not need anything, but he decided that you matter. He says that thought alone will help you get to a point of being able to relate to the godless of of the Abishter. It says that avodah is the avodah that you should be doing. Yeah. So I'm. So no, the bottom line goes on and on and on. There's no the bottom line is it's never finished because there's always another level of avodah, and we need to try to do every avodah that we can possibly do. But unfortunately, not everybody is in a state and that they can immediately do the avodah in the perfect way, that they can prevent the concept of meshakela purely by just giving themselves over to the Eibishter without any. So the Alter Rebbe goes through a couple of different levels of things that you can do if you're not there, if you can't experience the Eibishter, and then if a person has Timtum Alev or Timtum Hamoyach even, he says ultimately there has to be a Bakashas Rachamim because he says that you cannot choose to love. The minute you choose to love is the minute you involved yourself. And the minute you involved yourself, it's over. You can. So your job has to be to do an avodah where your job is just to be an avid. And if it comes down to it, and you can really do nothing else, and there's no avodah that you can possibly do with your mind or your heart, and you just have to do it. You just have to do it like an avid. You just have to do it because the Eibishter
Satisfaction of performing a job for his master. So that's it.
Yeah, look, if that's where a person is at, and they get a satisfaction from it, so be it. But the idea is just do it. And Mitzvah Shem, and if you break through those layers, one of the big things that gets accomplished when you don't involve your mind is if your mind says no and you still do it anyway, then you end up breaking your mind. And you break through the barriers, and then you can make your mind ultimately into subservient, and it can become a keli to the next level.